where we felt we were at was that if Leicester and Leicestershire and this area has this sort of sleeping giant, if you like, of a strength, how to wake it? Is it worth waking? And so what we did was we followed, other people's pointers and created Design Season, and it grew very well between year 1 and year 2 in reach, in number of partners and so on. But Design Season we could run, but actually, I suppose it was really just a way to bring people together and have a conversation. And as I say, this won't be new because these conversations have already started. So we were going to run DS3, and it was go backwards because of lockdown. And this is actually the 3rd iteration of it. But overall, I'm really glad that we've done it. We've got some great films and discussions and case studies and projects. And actually, because we've created it there, it becomes an asset that we can use again. But ultimately, I think LCB is sort of stretched to the limit at the moment in terms of what we can do. But also, if pandemic hadn't happened, my passion would be that if there's a design voice in Leicester, it should be designers. So we were just sort of suggesting and so on. So I put those thoughts down on the page. If there was a collective voice, is it worth doing? What would its role be? And ultimately, it's the biggest principle is, does it have value for the design community? And if it does, then we'll support it all the way. And incidentally, I had an email this week from, perversely, with the smallest Design Season we've ever had, but it's all on your hand, as it were, on your phone, on screen. Sad but true. I've had feedback via, I think it's come from the Mayor's office, and there's something potentially on the table for the future. So that could be really great. But right now, I just wanted to put those thoughts down, get a group of people together. Ideally, we'd all be in LCB having a nice cup of Gray's coffee, but not to be. So had a chat with Lou about this, and we felt that kind of managed Zoom would be a managed meeting, if you like, would be a good way to start to bring forward thoughts and ideas. And then at the end of this, whatever actions are there, if LCB can take some of those forward, we will, but ideally we'll do that together. But it was about getting focus, about being honest. Is this worth pursuing? And I've probably said too much. So I believe that making sense. So if it does, then Lou, I should hand over to you and become a listener.
Thank you, James. So before we get into what we think the art of the possible is with a Leicester design community, I would like to delve into a little bit more about what each of you think your businesses has in terms of a design USP. When you're pitching nationally, locally, or internationally, how that can come across. So I'd like to start with Joe from And New, please.
Well, I am part of a business partnership, And New Modern British Furniture. So our whole idea was to create new eco-conscious designs using the manufacturing that's available in Leicester. So pretty much everything is manufactured in Leicester, which was, I suppose that's a unique selling point in itself for furniture, because we're very used to having mass manufacturing. So we work with really conscious materials like recycled plastic. We work with sort of natural leathers and local craftsmen, and yeah, but trying to create something that is totally new. So have a very high aspiration as far as who we're selling to. My background was in sculpture, and my business partner Mirka's background is in psychology. So furniture design wasn't our natural step, but it was something that evolved really based around the manufacturing community that we've got around us and our own creativity, I suppose.
Brilliant, thank you, Joe. So we head over to Jim. Can you answer the question for us from your perspective from Borg Studios?
Thanks, Lou. I suppose if we were to claim a USP in what is a very noisy area to do work, and that's digital design, then I suppose it's the way we advocate design as an investment, not as a cost. A lot of companies fail to see the impact that investing in design has and can have upon their business, be that the adoption of new processes within the business or the generation of new IP in product terms. So yeah, helping them to understand, and also our approach to how we affect change culture within a business, because this type of change we like working with, and the space that we like to affect change in, comes with a lot of pain points, and having the empathy to understand those pain points and articulate how that can help a business evolve and add value is a really interesting area. Focuses as much on the business strategy as it does design strategy and thinking. So yeah, that's where I like to think we can provide a competitive edge.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And over to you, Bill.
I think a USP is difficult to create one because it changes through time. And as I'm probably the oldest one here, I've had lots of different times in my life when I thought that was the ultimate USP. We started doing I started in museums and heritage, but didn't like the people I was working with. So I ended up working for retail, and I didn't like people in retail. However, what that gave us was this huge pool of POS designers, graphic designers around me that helped me feed the hunger that I had, which was telling stories and how we develop and try and do that. So I think there was a big pool of talent, even though it wasn't necessarily what I was looking for at the time, but it was there rather than searching everywhere.
Brilliant, thank you. I will come back on to the talent pool later on in this discussion. So Jitin, your design story, please.
So I suppose Inspirate's USP largely revolves around the creation of new festivals, mainly in Leicester. And I think what defines us and separates us from other organisations based in the city, because there are dozens and dozens of festival producers and organisations here, is the type of events we produce. So everything from South Asian culture to graffiti and street art to large-scale digital art installations, which all are quite unique. So we've been in the city for about 10 years, and within that space, we produced 3 completely different festivals that stand out individually. And that process in designing those has been quite phenomenal. So that's where we sit in this picture.
I think you should certainly be applauded for the way in which you pivoted your Indian summer product to a virtual experience. It was really first class, and something that you should take a lot of kind of pride for doing in quite a short amount of time. To hit that level of quality was exceptional, so well done.
Thank you.
Let's go over to you, please, Fraser.
Okay, well, Parkside are a, I suppose, design-led task specification company. So they've been going since the early 80s, and our head office was and still is in Leicester. So we've got a strong affinity with the city. I suppose our USP, we're quite adaptable. We're quite adaptable. So, every relationship, every situation, there's always some problem, and that's generally where we focus, to try and solve people's problems and make things easier, to deal with us and to find the task specification they're looking for. So quite an open mind, which for a big company, that adaptability, I don't think is that common, to be honest.
Oh, super, thank you. And over to multiple entrepreneur, easy for me to say, Dan Barber, could you talk us through what you think your design USPs are?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with what lots of people have said in terms of it's not easy to define the USP of our business. I've been running the agency in Leicester. I only moved to Leicester in 2000, and I've been running the agency here for 20 years. And initially it was just me, and I'm a graphic designer by background. That was my passion, and that's what I did. And then so I think our USP, similar to what Fraser was saying, is our adaptability, because in those 20 years, we've been very much a fast-moving consumer goods agency, doing lots of dedicated work for PepsiCo and Callo Foods and people like that. even within the PepsiCo life cycle, we started off as a packaging design entity and ended up being a digital web microsite provider for their various brands. And where we find ourselves today is not necessarily by design, but fast becoming a kind of e-commerce dedicated business, because 2 or 3 years ago we were approached by a larger retailer business who had seen our body of work in brand and in hospitality and within FMCG, and they wanted to partner with us, or acquire us in fact, in order to be the e-commerce digital arm to their retail software business. So that's where we find ourselves today. So I think USP for us would definitely be the adaptability and the ability to get things done. I think they're really important for us. I love design. I love looking at other design houses across the city and across the country, and I admire them greatly. And I certainly wouldn't say that our USP was that we were the most creative or the most, these things that I do really aspire to. But adaptability, being robust, being able to deliver, those things I think are really important.
And how do we feel as a group in terms of looking back, certainly from my perspective, when we would be pitching for large accounts in London, there was a bit of a kind of stigma that you didn't have a London postcode. I'm going back quite a while now, but I can certainly remember the discussion with clients or potential buyers around servicing a London-based project if we were, 100 miles effectively north of the M25, and how would we deliver that versus somebody that was based in Shoreditch, as an example. So how do you feel that's changed over time? I certainly feel that it's no longer an issue. And if anything, the onset of the digital acceleration has made that a non-question. But I'm just interested from your perspective, if you feel there is still a bit of a kind of snobbery if you're based outside of London, or whether you feel as a design community nationally, we're now over that kind of stigma. Let's start with you, Jim.
I think it's only natural, Lou, for people to look local. I think London is one big ecosystem in its own right. I think it suffers from cliqueiness in certain sectors. Yeah, if you're in Shoreditch or if you're in Clerkenwell or any other areas of London, there is those sub-cliques as well. What I think in Leicester we could do better is to join forces. We've had some recent success with Create Leicester. I'm now talking to business owners who a few years back I had very little knowledge of, but now business referrals are flying back and forth. We're dealing with some real pertinent issues that are related to our current circumstances, and competing with London agencies, but competing further afield. I've always thought of London as rather ad-centric as well, and advertising spend, and they're fed by larger market research agencies that set briefs for them. So I've never really looked enviably at London. It's always been a wonderful city that's provided much inspiration. Yeah, I like to keep a focus on a more national picture and look for inspiration globally and everywhere, as any sort of good creative should.
Wonderfully inspiring. Thank you, Jim. Would anybody else like to comment on this point?
I think that for and new, being outside of London has actually been a benefit as far as manufacturing and making. So being very connected and close to our makers actually gives us, it's a really big benefit for us, because we need to be talking to those people far more than we talk to the people that we're selling to. And obviously, as you pointed out, being online now, actually it doesn't really matter where you're based, because your customers are finding you in a different space. They're not finding you on a high street, they're finding you on a website. So I think that's been really important to us. However, I do think there is a pool of talent in London that is far greater than Leicester, and I think London still has the power to pull talent in, whereas Leicester doesn't have that at the moment, and it finds it very hard to keep talented people, because there are larger opportunities elsewhere. And I wonder whether Leicester's close proximity to London actually has a negative effect in that way, because actually it's very easy for people in Leicester to move to London or to sell in London. And that, with that market being so much bigger, why wouldn't they? It's, you know, so sometimes I wonder whether it's a pull away from Leicester. Yeah, so they're the two sides of my thinking in that relationship.
I sorry to interrupt. I often joke on calls when people aren't familiar with the geography. I say we're based in Leicester, which is North Londonshire, and sometimes they don't even realise I'm joking. But yeah,
I think when we were based in Shoreditch for 7 or 8 years, as well as having a space in the depot, which I think must be one of the oldest tenants, James. We first had our office in 2005. So I'm looking forward to getting that special 20-year present at some point in the future. Yeah, you know, when we were in Shoreditch, we would say, you know, it can take you an hour and a half to go from West to East London. And that's the, you know, equivalent of going from Leicester to anywhere in, you know, central London, really. So the competitive argument for us was never really there. Just drawing to what you said, Joe, about the talent pool, and moving into our next section of debate around forming a Design Leicester community formally, if you like. Do we feel that having a cohesive strategy around bringing together all the different enterprises and businesses within Leicester that has a design focus, in order to have a strategy that would really act as a magnet to retain and attract talent to stay within the city and in our businesses? Do we think that would be one core objective from having a Design Leicester group?
I think it ought to be an objective. I think to Joe's point about attracting talent and keeping it, I think a lot of that is about what you can do in the place socially, isn't it? You know, a lot of the reasons people are drawn to these places is everything else. It's not so much the work. And what's wonderful about wonderful and pandemic don't normally go together, but what's wonderful about it is it's removed that requirement to be anywhere geographically for work, which was never the case anyway, because you've got amazing agencies in this city working with people in San Francisco and New York and Japan and all these kind of things. So it was never the case, but the pandemic has kind of wiped all that out, because we're now recruiting and where people live is no longer even a question. We're just not asking that question anymore. We're just not worried, because we can see a new way of working. So I think the pandemic changes things anyway on attracting and retaining talent, because people can work remotely. But in the future, if it gets back to what it was before, I think that we also should have one of our objectives is to push the city to be developing and doing more to create, you know, this ecosystem that you talked about that makes people want to be here.
Yeah. I would add to that. I think as a company that has goods to sell, I think Leicester has very few spaces that champion selling design, art, and things like that. So the culture there, as far as buying from your local craftspeople, your local designers, your local artists, it isn't that strong. And I think that is an area that really needs to be developed. And that goes back to sort of making it accessible for people. Like until very recently, Leicester didn't even have a website that would tell you what was going on in the galleries, in the Leicester museums. The Leicester museums don't have a world sort of aspiring, exhibitions and things like that. It tends to be one thing at a time. It's quite a slow pace. I think we need to have a much more dynamic flow and look outwards as well as looking inwards, like look out to high class, world aspiring exhibitions and events, and not just keep it focused on the Leicester community, because if we look in, then no one's, you know, we're not attracting people from the outside.
Yeah, and just following on from Joe's point here, I feel like retaining talent is a key objective. Leicester's beaming, especially in the cultural industry over the last 10 years, it's changed shape and form from new architectural landscape to new festival producers, new events, and it really has changed and evolved, and it's this new beast now. But a unified approach is always going to be stronger, rather than competing against each other. And that doesn't mean that there isn't room for competition, because there will always be that, particularly in the cultural industry, when you've got dozens of arts organizations going after the same pots of money. But I think what's changed and is a really nice movement is people are beginning to work together, and there is a sense of a shared objective and a shared vision. So when you look at festivals like Bring the Paint, which is bringing international talent to the city and completely changing this landscape as we know it, and I understand I'm going on a slight tangent here away from the main question. It's really shining an international spotlight on this city, which has huge capabilities, massive amounts of potential, so many interesting things under its belt. For example, one of the first multicultural plural cities in Europe, which, you know, it's an accolade that no one has. And I think sometimes the city doesn't use its strengths to its greatest capabilities. And I sometimes get tired of seeing the same faces leading the same things. And I think it's time to start handing this over to the next generation of people who can make this, who can really shift the dynamics. And I mean that in the cultural industry, because I understand we're all from different sort of sectors of design as such. But I strongly believe that there is huge potential in collaborating.
I think that's a really key term that's coming through everyone's dialogue on this session, is that collaboration is something we're very keen and open for. And I wonder whether we have a really unique window coming hopefully through the pandemic next spring to really harness the new kind of vibe and aspiration that we have as a set of entrepreneurs across the city and county to really drive a new agenda of collaboration. But really, very much to your point, Joe, not just thinking about inwardly and what we're celebrating inwardly, but thinking about the national and even international landscape, and how can we collectively promote our talent and really use those unique selling points to achieve all of our business goals, but also collectively to put ourselves as a group on the stage. And I think that's very much what James's vision around a Design Leicester group was formed around. And certainly with the news that we kicked off with, that there had been a kind of soft piece of interest into potentially some local authority interest in what we're trying to achieve. I wonder whether we should really move forward with this initiative and, open to your comments, and put together a strategy ourselves and say, we know how to build a business from scratch and how to make it successful, and even how to adapt during a pandemic. So what can the government do in terms of funding to back us and support us to really drive forward what we know we can achieve already in our business settings? But what can we achieve as a collective group of comrades going forward as a Design Leicester group? And open to your comments, whether you think that's too grandiose or whether you think it is something we can achieve. And what would it look like? What would it need to consist of? Fraser, can I start with you?
No. I mean, you know, this whole thing is sort of like, in the last sort of two to 3 years, I hadn't really considered the Leicester design community, and I don't mean that meanly, because I knew people within the city, but it was only really when James reached out and we started to talk to him about possibly trying to, you know, promote Parkside more and sort of get it more well known within the city, that the question even arose. And I had no idea of the challenges that everyone faced just to put on events and just to do things like that. I had no concept how difficult that would be for people, and obviously still is. You know, my fear now is that with all that we've been through this year, that somehow these things are going to be put on people's back burner. I mean, even with our own company, you know, it set us back quite considerably. You know, that then prevents how you invest in certain things, and it's the same goes for everyone. We have to, I think, even more so now, we have to be more creative, because I'm not sure you're going to get the amount of support that you need from governments, really. I don't know, but other people will know more about that than me. But yeah,
I think the government see creative industries generally as the future,
right,
and that's the most exciting thing for all of us, is that that's where they will hopefully stick some money. One of the things with Leicester is that I've always bashed the mayor and others' ears, or anybody who listen, is that we don't have a real art gallery.
I agree.
And until we've got some scale, I mean, we've got Leicestershire museums, but it's a series of small galleries that's got quite nice collections. What we're talking about is somewhere that people go, I've got to go there. You know, like the Yorkshire Sculpture Park or any of these other things, have another reason to be here. And as much as I love the LCB and the Attenborough Centre and all these, sorry, James, don't get me wrong here, they're all small in physicality. We've got lots of people doing things, but somehow how do we, you know, get the politicians and other people who open the purse strings to
big large nucleus,
yeah. But I think us talking as a big group, I mean, what really ticked me off a couple of years ago was there was a study done in the mid 2015 or something, where they were handing out government money to creative industries, and we didn't get any because we weren't perceived as being a creative centre of anything. Basingstoke got it, and Lowestoft, and all sorts of strange places. But we should have been up there. So why weren't we being listened to or looked at properly? And that's partly to do with our politicians and us getting up and waving the flag as much as we can.
Yeah. I think I completely agree with you, Bill. I think that having an aspirational face for visual arts and design, something that's a very high standard that will pull people into the city, automatically creates an environment where the people who belong to the city want to stay there because people are interested in them, because there is something to offer. And if the city can't offer young people something that others are interested in, then how will they see themselves as interesting? And so anyone coming through the creative industries will look elsewhere because people aren't interested in Leicester in a creative and visual way, which is the design, architecture, art, fine art.
I think what's happened with COVID has hastened things rapidly. I mean, things were changing, flexibility, sustainability, Black Lives Matter, all of those issues are coming together. And I think the LCB, while I'm saying it's physically small, it's intellectually big. And I think we've got to use the technologies, the digital, and as people on this call that are, you know, specialists in digital world, which is not mine, to make LCB appear bigger than it is, because we've always got stuff going on and going out. And I'm not taking it away from what you're doing, James, because I think you're doing a great job putting us all together to talk about it. I'll shut up now.
I think there's an interesting point here, which is essentially, would a creation of a new building signify the sort of like gold badge of what we're talking about? And I'm not sure it does, because there are a huge amount of NPOs in the city. It is one of the biggest theatres in the Midlands. There are numerous arts organisations, numerous festivals. The issue is there's not a unified approach, and there's not something that brands us collectively in a strong way, because it's all here. But until James started design season, we didn't look ourselves at our design city, when we have one of the largest clusters of small to medium enterprises in the Midlands that are within the creative industries, and it's skyrocketing. The festival industry is skyrocketing. The amount of money that the city is getting from Arts Council is huge, but it's not branded together. It's not unified. And don't get me wrong, I would love a new big art gallery. I sit on the board of New Art Exchange, and I'm really jealous of it. Because Nottingham has contemporary and it has NAE, but we don't, you know, we have Attenborough and we have Deacon Street, which is at an early stage. And I think Deacon Street has a lot of potential. But I'm not sure new architecture is the solution.
It's not necessarily about new architecture, but having a place where art from outside is shown in a curated, really highly aspirational way, and not necessarily art, maybe design, any of the visual arts. We really don't have a place for that. And the Attenborough Centre is beautiful and it's amazing. But for instance, it has one exhibition this year that was supposed to be running for the whole year, which is a digital style exhibition. And I mean, there's been huge studies as far as access to culture goes and how that benefits a city. So why we haven't invested in that, I don't know. I know sort of if you go around the city, there's a lot of really great places, but there's a lot of also really deprived places. There's a lot of places that wouldn't have access to any form of culture, creative culture. And I think the city's got a lot more work to do as far as bringing education up to a high standard. If you have a look at the MK Gallery in Milton Keynes, which is a very, very small place, a small town, and the gallery is highly aspirational. It has highly aspirational exhibitions on from worldwide artists, and it has a weekly things that go on to bring schools in and educate young people. And I think there is a huge hole there in Leicester where they don't do that.
I think to Jacin's point as well is about we haven't really got an overarching brand for everything that we offer. I think that you talked about, somebody had referenced competition, and there are a lot of agencies and creative businesses that fall into the same kind of areas. But one thing I think probably as I've got older as well, you become less precious about all of that stuff, and you realize there's so much going on for everybody to have a good go at. And suddenly you find yourselves really proud of your counterparts in your immediate area. You know, we see the work from Hayley Sharp or Checklands or Made by Six, which came out of Untitled, and all these big and the wonderful things that Dylan and those guys have achieved. You're just, I'm proud of it all. I'm proud that I was able to be a part of it, especially not being originally from Leicester and moving up here. So I've always wanted to see some kind of, I guess right now is a website that just let everybody see all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I weirdly, just a minute ago, I was thinking about, it's kind of almost not connected in any way, but there's a wonderful food court in Copenhagen on the harbour that you go to, and it's got about 50 different food vendors in there, but they're not worried about who's going to go and buy that food or that food. There's just a nucleus of people go there because they know it's good food and it's good energy and it's going to be a good atmosphere. And the equivalent, we should create the online equivalent for Leicester's creative world, that people just go on this thing and see all this energy and go, right, I've got to get involved. I've either got to work there or move there or procure from there. That's what I'd love to see.
But it'd be great if there's a physical space alongside that where the Leicester community can actually just drop in and enjoy and celebrate that. I think definitely.
I feel there's a general consensus that a premise of a Design Leicester group is a good idea, and that whilst ambition is always something to be celebrated, it actually would generate benefits for us as a collective group, but also for everyone connected to our individual businesses. So just a kind of, if you could indicate whether you think this is something we should go forward with, and any of the further comments on that basis. Jason, can I start with you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I absolutely agree that we can start this design collective and start shaping Leicester's future. I think it's paramount.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dan?
I agree with what he said. 100%. Yeah.
Jim?
It feels like I've been here once or twice before. 2015 is one of those occasions. Tom Fleming's consultancy as well. And nothing has moved on. So I'm just mulling over the reasons why nothing has moved on, given that so many great things have happened and my instinct is that our design community has grown. Well, I know it's grown. How our voice is best heard is really interesting. I know for a fact that the LEP will perceive itself to be doing what it should be doing in terms of helping our sector. The peer-to-peer networking pilot that's just been announced and launched. There's obviously the talent retention project as well, 1.6 million of funds for that, bringing together the universities. So, which both of those touch on the networking aspect, the talent retention aspect we've discussed so far. So I suppose what I'm getting to is, what are our objectives? What is it we can do as a collective voice, and how to best position that? So my instinct says we need to be a lobbying voice. We need to actually bring together a unified approach across all the wonderful activity that we've heard about so far this afternoon, and one that actually talks the language of the respective entities such as the LEP and local government, but also has a voice international government as well, because we can't rely on people in the LEP and our local government to do that for us. I think that's a mistake we've made previously, and we've lent on the LEP or expected to then hand it over and them champion us. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you. I quite agree. If you were to look at it really quite simply, we're actually exporters of our services. And I wonder how much support we each feel we've had from local government to national in terms of generating the mini ecosystems we're each responsible for. Maybe that's a point for another meeting. Bill, what's your thoughts?
No, I tend to agree with what everybody's saying, really. I mean, it's hard to put our arms around it to work out what those 5 points are. But I think lobbying and getting out there and shouting about it in a solid, I'm trying to think of the right word. You know, the problem with designers, we're so diverse. However, we all do the same thing. We design things, and we ask the right questions to get the right answer. And it's a simple process. Everything we touch in life, everything I can see in your background, somebody has designed it, good, bad, or indifferent. So why isn't it more important in the country than it is here? We don't teach it strongly enough in schools. I think DMUs could be a good partner in this to sort of, you know, they want to retain their students. They got a good reputation for the design schools and the fashion and things. And Leicester Museum Studies at Leicester University are great as well. So part of it is, it's almost too big to put your arms around, but how do we put our hands around something small that we can get going? But I definitely feel we should be saying it, because if we don't say it, no one else is going to.
Thank you. Fraser, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I mean, Bill's right. If we don't push, then you know, we're all working in silos. We're all kind of got very different businesses, some of us, and I think anything where if it's worth doing, it's not going to be easy. We're not going to solve it with a Zoom call, but we might, you know, it might just start moving things in the right direction. I think maybe a bit more regular, this kind of thing, a bit more regular. Maybe somebody's making notes and then that follows on to something else. I don't know. It all seems very new, all this thing, from my perspective. You know, I've been only involved with it, like I say, only for about 2 or 3 years. So it's all a bit of an eye opener, but exciting. Yeah, but I think worthwhile. I think you've got to get a bit between your teeth. Otherwise nothing will happen. It's like in anything. If you don't have an end objective, you know, you're not going to even begin that journey, are you? You've got to know where you're going in the end and where you want to be, like Jim said. So
yeah,
Thank you.
I'd like to add to that. It seems like the conversations that are happening around design season 3 is about asking lots of questions to very different industries, all under one sort of broad umbrella, but industries that might not necessarily have much to do with each other. And I wonder whether there is a lack of purpose and a lack of a destination point. So there's a lot of questions and we're branching out, but actually what we're not doing is saying this is what we want to achieve. And I think we could be far more productive if there was a destination and what our objectives and our identity wanted to become. It would perhaps inspire a little bit more participation from others, because from a personal point of view, you know, you can spend all of your time on your business and building up your business, and our sales are elsewhere. Our sales aren't in Leicester, so I could focus on that. But it would be brilliant at the same time to have a design community. It would be brilliant to be excited about the city in a design with a design identity, and that really needs a curator. It really needs a focus point, and it really needs sort of an idea of where we're going, not just lots of questions about where each individual person sees themselves. That's just my perspective. Yeah.
That's a really good point. I completely agree with that.
So I wonder whether to drive ourselves forward, we could be as simple as saying over the next 3 years, we would like to achieve 1 goal per year, and what that might look like and how we could corral and create a really strong articulation of message that we can both use when we're working locally and wider afield, and also trying to bring that inward investment in, which ultimately that is what we're doing with our business. You know, the invoices are paid locally and we spend that both on people and on products and on place. So do we feel that would be a smart way to try and look to go in a simple format where we say for each of the next 3 years, this is one thing we would like to see that we achieve, that we can measure, that we can review and evolve over time? And is that greater than obviously just a design season premise? Are we talking about a regular interaction of message, or are we talking about something quite narrow, which ends, you know, starts in August, ends in October? You know, what are we really thinking that would need to feel and look like? Justin, I'll come to you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think from a point of curating festivals, this process has already started with design season, you know, and whether we're talking about an offshoot here is a question. And I quite like Joe's thoughts around it doesn't necessarily, right now we're talking very, I suppose, individually about our own organizations and having this collective purpose. But it might be found through our own individual research and what we want to achieve within year 1, 2, and 3, and there's probably some correlation there. But I'm brainstorming this in my mind at the moment, but can design season be this driving force that we're talking about? Because it seems to already exist. Therefore, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's already tons of organizations, companies, businesses out there that are already under this banner, many of whom are doing amazing work and I've not even heard of. And I think that's a credit to what has already been achieved so far. So I'm still brainstorming in my mind. I know that's not a very straightforward answer, but I would say that perhaps there's an evolving of design season here, and what Leicester could be branded as potentially. And I've read this report. I've not read all of it, but I read the report that James spoke about earlier in this conversation, and it is quite relevant, you know, and if anything, it's developed over the years and it's becoming stronger and stronger. So if that's what we're identifying as a city, then I suppose it's a good way forward. So I hope that sort of roundabout answers the question a little.
Yeah, for sure. I think what I'm trying to get to is, do we feel the need for a design community brand and action plan, in a sense, has leapfrogged the origination of a design season, in that if you were to look at it as a family tree, that the brands of the design community would perhaps be at the top, and the design season festival would be an offshoot or a child of that family tree in terms of how we could move forward. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
James, over to you.
I think the idea of a campaigning group, lobbying, advocacy, and maybe we can assemble some objectives which take in your ideas, but it's those sorts of things. I love the idea. I'm looking at 3 spaces over the next 3 weeks because we've illustrated what space can be on a small scale, and now people are saying, we like what you do, and one of these spaces is enormous. So maybe there's a way to take these things forward. But I am now, having done 4 years, I'm at the point that I'm fine to be a facilitator, but right next to me, backing me up, in front of me, I need design business voices, a design group. Now, I'm not saying what it should look like and it should be a committee and all the rest of it, but to illustrate what you can do is that one of the objectives I'm talking about, I know we can't do it on our own, it was to attract more people to the cultural quarter. So there was a cultural quarter association, and it was just withered on the vine. It didn't meet, it met and then didn't do anything. So we set up with all the bars and cafes the cultural quarter ground floor group, just a tactical group. And I said, we're going to do a thing, and it's going to be called Last Friday. One night in the cultural quarter, street food, art, lots of fun, what's not to like, and it's going to be completely diverse. And they sort of said, well, we don't get it. So right, I want 10,000 people in the cultural quarter once a month. And then they got it. And now we've got to about 5,000 to 6,000 because everybody's contributed. But the people that haven't contributed are the big funded organisations. So what I'm saying is all of these things that I scribbled down, everything sounds really sensible to me, but to go forward, we do need some kind of collective voice. I don't want to define what we go forward on, but everything I've written down kind of maps onto what I feel we've earned a right to say, because for 4 years we've been literally banging on a wall saying, hello, Mr. Let, hello, head of strategy, hello, please listen to what we do. Look at these businesses, look at this, So I don't wish to whinge, I'm just literally saying I think there has been progress, but it won't go further without some sort of collective voice.
I think I would just come in and say there's 2 things there that really spring to mind. Number one is, what would we do with some financial investment, and where would it best be spent in terms of value for money, value for time? But secondly, I wonder whether, James, we could give you the mantle for you to broker an opportunity for us to get collectively together around the table just to talk to these stakeholder groups in terms of where we feel there are gaps and what we feel we could do with financial investment in terms of benefit for all. So maybe if there was a date on the horizon, that would give us a real kind of momentum to focus on building something cohesive collectively that would generate the 3 or 5 things we're looking to achieve over the next 5 years.
Well, I mean, I think we're at that point, is that, so something's just happened which surprised me, which might be really good. And I think that because we've literally, so for instance, you asked a point, Joe, there is investment out there, Bill's just mentioned it. But I think that the industry, different sectors coming together will be a better voice to argue for that than currently it's LCB. And various conversations, like Bill said, he's got that inside edge. I know Jim's view is always so, it's very well respected. But where I'm getting to is every penny that goes into design season, that goes into work on student retention for the creative industries, every penny comes because we work really hard to earn more money and to cut our costs. That's slightly, I'd like to use the word obscene, but it's actually, so we're sort of like a charity for the creative industries. And actually there's loads more money out there, but it kind of, oh, well, you're doing that or you're doing that. And it's like, wow, guys, is that every year I have this awkward conversation. Well, we did earn this and I should give you that, but I've kept this and I've put it into this. And it's just an uncomfortable position that sooner or later we won't be allowed to continue. So it's done through mutual respect and so on. However, something might have changed. And I've just been asked by stakeholders to say, how could the design community, and this is all because it's the smallest design season we've had, but it's all on your phone. And I can say, look at this, it's on your phone. It's like you don't have to come to a gallery on a dark night or anything like that. You know, you can look on your phone. And that's what I think's tipped the balance. And what we've been asked is, how could the design community be a tool to support inward investment?
Yeah.
That might open the door to resources.
Yeah, that's
so that's an immediate, because I'm all for, I love talking with Dan because Dan's very output driven. So Dan's got this great initiative, DICE. There's a program on, a TV program on LCB TV next week, talking about diversity in the creative industries and creative enterprise. But Dan very talks about the output will be this, and that's great, because what this investment might give us, if we can come up with an argument and win that argument, that's investment that can go into some of these things. So there might be a moment in time. I don't want to, you know, ever the optimist sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I think we should build on that. I'll share a spreadsheet I did of all the, if you look at creative industries from architecture to fashion and everything in between, who would represent those as a group and where are they and who are they? And it's quite long. But it's a start in terms of just, well, here's the people that we should be talking to as well. Having said that, we should try and keep it to initially to a tight group that sets some goals, sets some ideas forward. You know, I like the idea of the 3-year program, but I think we need 5 things that we want to do in the next 3 years that changes the way we're perceived in Leicester.
That sounds good to me. That 5 in 3, I definitely hung on to that.
It's got a nice number in there.
Yeah, because I guess we could do 1 and 2 reasonably quickly, which would be, and I say that really optimistically in terms of setting a brand and articulating what that tone of voice should be when we're speaking outwardly. I can't imagine how difficult that would be for creative, innovative individuals to come together on what that 2 or 3 keyword sentence might be. But maybe we could kick that off and say, by this time next year, we want to have a platform that is branded, that we have signed up to in terms of how it represents us and our talent as exporters of design from Leicester across wherever the landscape is. And I think that is really achievable. I don't see why we can't do that. You know, we know, starting up businesses from 0 to where they are now, just how quickly you can move with momentum. When you have defined goals against a defined timeline, that's how all plans are created. So, you know, why can't we be ambitious and say, maybe even quicker, by the start of Q2 next year, could we have a brand and a platform that we're building towards, to that kind of 2 in 1 year goal that we'd like to achieve next year.
And I really like that James referenced diversity in creative enterprise, because if this whole movement has got these kind of subplots of things that get carried along with them as well, you know, this wonderful multicultural city and attracting diversity into this brilliant agency or brilliant industry, then it'd be great if those things can move alongside it. Yeah. And I would certainly be really happy to kind of drive that area of it within the overall as part of the kind of driving force. So, if
you don't mind me coming back in there, just to, actually there has been progress, and although it's been sort of architecture, if you like, I don't mean the architects. I mean, what I mean is that Jim's initiative, Sanjay, you know, jumped right into that role. We now have an authoritative voice for the digital design agency cluster that we have, which is Create. And they have had, I mean, we're all experiencing the downturn to some degree in these joint activities, but they're an established voice in the city. They speak for that sort of subsector. We have REBA partnership with the Leicester Society of Architects. It sounds a bit fuddy-duddy, but they put some great events on in design season. You know, they debated this white paper, which looks appalling on the surface of it, how you can, what constitutes a home now, what we'll do. Talking about diversity, the REBA director from London talking, and so on. There is a designer maker network. We have and this is why when we get, I've just spoken with Jitin and a bunch of people, our city is regularly coloured in by great cultural producers that work elsewhere, but I know that the city doesn't engage with that group and say, what could a year in Leicester look like, you know, from a cultural point of view? What an amazing conversation that would be. Film Leicester, it's a business-led outfit. I was lucky enough, I managed to film office in Birmingham, and that brought in investment, organised shoots and all the rest of it. There's a business-led, which is a tick in my box, a business-led, created by Tenor, trying to pull a film community together. And Mike has actually grabbed onto that. So we're getting to the point now, we start to have places of sort of credibility, if you like, across the spectrum. And I just, from LCB's role, I want to keep pushing down that. So you want to talk about design agencies, you talk to Create. You want to talk about architecture, you talk here, and so on and so forth. And you don't have the critical mass in every sort of subsector. With people such as yourselves and those networks, you do start to get up. You get these 10 guys in a room, and you're going to have a proper conversation about the creative industries. And that's where I think we're coming to, which to investors like the council, and even the higher echelons of higher education, because, you know, they've got more money than God. You know what I mean? It's like, these are people you can talk to make changes and make a difference.
I think there's a whole group of people that we aren't connecting with yet that are designers and creatives, and that's science. And with the space park just about to open in the next 12 months, I was asked to review some of the spaces they were going to create. And there are going to be meeting spaces, film things, all sorts of virtual stuff. But they don't see themselves as creative. I mean, you know, they build these rockets and stuff and send them to everywhere. So the scale is wide, and I think we mustn't forget that there are these scientists, creative people out there as well. I don't know if anybody who's on the call is a scientist, but
this is probably one of the biggest areas in creative life at the moment. The art science bridge is like a huge thing, and I think to educate people on that, I mean, how educated are people on that? You know, it's something that's completely accessible and exciting for anybody. Anybody could engage in it to understand the connections between art and science.
Yeah. I love the sound of this. Sorry, I just say my eldest daughter, she was doing 3 A levels. She's just decided to add biology into the mix. So it's art history, biology, ancient history, and Spanish. It's like, oh, fantastic.
Brilliant. One of the most exciting architects that I think is, have you heard of Neri Oxman? She's creating basically bioarchitecture, so architecture that grows itself from biological materials. It's like it's the leading thing in this kind of world at the moment, and you wonder how much we could sort of like hook onto something like that with the Leicester University, with the science thing, you know, and with De Montfort. It's a real crossbreed of what we have available.
It's big in my world in that biophilic interiors and buildings, that's what everybody all talks about. So unless you've got the biophilic specialists on your team, whether you find them locally, you know, you're missing out. So I mean, just the idea that science is part of this creative world that we live in.
So creating this story that's aspirational, that's higher than what's already here. And I think sometimes we have this tendency to focus on what is available, what is in Leicester, what is here. But actually what we should be saying is, what is the next thing that's happening? What is the newest thing that's happening in the world? You know, what are people thinking about? What are the new developments and technologies, and what are the new creative ideas? And that's really what we should be having a conversation about if we're going to inspire people to lift it up to the next level and look to Leicester as a you know, leader. Yeah,
because I mean the architects calling it the space race. You know, where do you find the space within buildings, and do you have to create more space?
Yeah.
So we go out into outside of our buildings. We use the landscape around us, and I think, you know, the cultural quarter is not just 6 buildings. It's a space, and I think going back to what James has been doing, I think we should just do more. I think someone said earlier that it's young people that should be doing this, and I couldn't agree more. that I think, you know, I'm pleased to be saying my pennyworth, but it's got to be driven by young people and people who have the energy and the things. I'm a bit worn out.
Very much young at heart, Bill, and I think you're crucial to this drive, at least initially, before you feel you're comfortable enough to hand over the reins. So
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be part of it, but I think that the real ideas come from people who are doing digital all the time. People are doing creative things. This people out in Lutterworth are doing this gesturing rather than touching, you know, and facial recognition. It's gesture recognition, color recognition. So you haven't got to touch anything, but you just things respond to you. There's a lot of fantastic people out there in our bailiwick.
I think the situation we're in at the minute will only drive that even further, won't it? Because it's like when you're in a war situation, like technology speeds up to adapt to whatever the circumstances is. Well, we are a bit like on a war footing at the minute. Everyone's having to change how they work. Everyone's having to adapt to a more digital approach. Now, it doesn't preclude you from still having to have physical space and physical meetings, but it means that the other stuff can enhance that a little bit and get you going.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right, but I think technology and development of technology is going to allow us to have these multiple perspectives on things. It's not just about one particular story and that's the way we preach it. It's a certain event has implications for 10 different communities, and technology allows you to see those 10 things. So it's not just an empirical, you know, learn this, get that, move on. And I think with new technologies and what's happening, I think it's a brilliant time. I mean, it's anyway. Sorry.
And of course, the role that science plays in terms of underpinning our future at the moment, and the innovation and speed and design of that solution that we're all relying on, I think really sets the tone for some of the discussions here today. So with that, thank you very much for everyone's comments and feedback and energy. It's been really, really inspiring, and I really feel there is a strong consensus to do something positive that would make a difference in terms of pushing forward a collective objective for benefits for all. So I'll hand over to James now. Thank you.
I love working with you all. I'd like to say that. I really do. It's 4 years I've done. Can you believe that? My goodness. But and they still let me do other bits and pieces. So I keep the tool sharp, hopefully. But I do really love working with you, and it's something to do. You know, I came back to the city. I've been 12 years away. I couldn't believe that. Renewed a few relationships, met, but mainly built new ones. And it is, I do feel there's it's a sleeping giant, but I had to write down a little while ago. I've worked in 14 European cities in the past 25 years, all within the creative industries. And this city easily competes, if that's the right word, easily has talent and promise, and but maybe lacks that focused ambition. So there might be a moment in time. I think, thank you enormously for giving me an hour and 20 minutes of your day. I really do appreciate that, because I'm at the stage that for me to feel right in it, I've got to have, as it were, people at my side, even if they're not physically there, to know that what I'm doing means something to you individually as designers and design businesses. So maybe the best thing to do is distill a number of things from the conversation, stick to my guns. This is aired, as it were, next week, and please do promote this show, and let's get as many people commenting as possible. See where that body of things is, that's statements and so on. There's been some great stuff today, and we'll put it back, and there's what to do, but then there's the how to do it. And so we need to think about some sort of MO that gets at your brains, but doesn't put a huge drain on your time, because that's not a sustainable model. So that's where I feel that we're at, and I hope that makes sense.
James, if I could just come back on what you said in terms of competing as a city on an international scene. I think from my perspective, perhaps where we're coming from as entrepreneurs working in a silo basis, is that we're very humble about the ambition we have, perhaps more so than other cities that have become very good at articulating collectively what talent they have and how that is supported by local government in terms of funding and a cohesive strategy to really market themselves on a bigger stage. So I think if we could have that same support and that real muscle behind us as a group of people, there is nothing that we couldn't do that any other city has been able to achieve with that one tone, one collective voice. So really the ambition is here. We just need some support in order to go and achieve it.
Mhm.
Well said, Lou.
Okay, Dave.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, yeah, great to chat with you. Great to meet you all, those that have not met, and really good to speak. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Speak soon.
you.
Bye.
Speak soon.
Take care. Thanks for your time.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.